What's up, Infected? It's Wolf the Quarantine, and today I'm going to be taking a look at Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Hellblade is a fantasy adventure game developed by Ninja Theory, and in the game you take control of a Celtic warrior named Senua, and she has to venture into Helheim to save her lover's soul from the Norse goddess Hela. Now, at the very beginning of the game, you're going to get a very Greek Eurydice kind of vibe, where a lover has to go down into the underworld to try to retrieve their lover. And I wonder if that's kind of the vibe that they were going for, but it's definitely what I felt. So in the very beginning of Senua's journey, you find out that she has been cursed by the darkness. However, you wind up finding out very, very early in the game that it's basically a form of psychosis. Now, the psychosis takes the form of visions, but she also hears multiple voices in her head that is known as the Furies. So I'm going to start with the visuals. As you can see on screen, the visuals are really, really nice. And keep in mind, I'm actually only running this at medium settings. My potato of a computer is a little dated and probably could use an update. But as you can see around here, the textures of everything is really, really cool. Everything looks clean, crisp, and you really get the vibe that the game is trying to put forth, the very dark and bleak vibe that it's putting forth. You can definitely see a lot of the Norse mythology and the Norse just architecture really stand out, along with a lot of the Celtic stuff that the game has peppered in with the visions and Senua's outfit and garb and little symbols and stuff that she has on herself. Then if you look at Senua's character model directly, it is outstanding, down to just all of the cloth, the clothes that she's wearing, her hair, all of it moves really realistically and feels almost very real. And then on top of that, her facial animations, the facial capture software that they use, is phenomenal. You can really feel the emotion in her face throughout the whole story. You can feel the pain and the sorrow that she's just expressing just through her facial animations. Then there's also a few areas in the game that I am pretty confident it's actually just live acting with a filter over it, because it looks that real in terms of the look of the people. So I think the next appropriate stop is actually going to be audio. And as a lot of you guys probably already know, I don't put a lot of stock into audio, and not to say that in a bad way, but if the audio is good, then I shouldn't notice it. It should do its job. It should really enforce the feeling in the setting. If it's bad, I'm definitely going to notice it. The audio in this game is also outstanding. It is top notch. The voice acting, the emotion in Senua's voice, the whispers, like, just listen for yourself.
He saved you when everyone else turned. You can't go up. You can't go up. Not in this world.
The gods will punish you for this.
Get up.
Pick up the sword. Pick it up. Fight the darkness.
So yeah, as I said, the audio in this game is phenomenal. The grunts, the groans, the ambience, the whispers, the screams, the cries, everything feels very real, feels very in place. The actual music is just epic at times. The actual music will come in sometimes during a fight or during a really tense scene, and then the final boss's music really hits the nail directly on the head. Without a doubt, this is a game that you are going to want to play with headphones on to get the full experience and the full emotion of this game. Now, I know what some of you guys are saying, but Wolf, what about the gameplay? Well, hold your horses, I'm getting to that. The gameplay is really split between three different mechanics. You have a walking simulator, puzzle solving, and combat. So the walking simulator is a walking simulator. It's really walking from one place to the other and admiring the atmosphere and going from puzzle to puzzle. That's basically it. The combat starts off really, really cool. It's very basic combat system. You have a light and heavy attack, and that's it. And you have a block and a dodge. And that's the combat. Not super fancy. You can't pull off these huge elaborate combos, anything like that. But throughout the course of the game, up until about the halfway point, the combat starts evolving and you start learning new things about the combat. Like now here you can focus, or now this guy maybe goes invisible and now you have to focus to be able to even see him, or maybe this guy's now got a shield. What do you do now? So it's basically, it slowly evolves throughout it, and throughout that evolution process, the combat is super fun. It's really fluid. It feels really nice. You usually only fight 3 or 4 enemies. You fight 3 or 4 enemies and then you get to move on. The combat never outstays its welcome. Feels very well timed, and it feels like it has a place. Then you get to about the 50% mark, and that's when the combat loses pretty much everything that made it a lot of fun. For one, the combat stops evolving. So now, every time you go into combat, you really start dreading it, because it's just the same thing over and over again. It's very monotonous, very tedious. But then on top of that, the game starts throwing very large quantities of enemies at you, almost like it's trying to deliberately pad the gameplay. And what I mean by a lot is sometimes you're fighting like 30 or 40 enemies just in one fight sequence. It only throws 3 or 4 at a time, but it feels like they just keep coming. And because of that, the last half of the game, combat starts feeling really tedious. You really don't want to do it anymore. And to be honest, I put my combat difficulty down to easy at that point, just because I stopped really caring about the combat and it stopped being fun. Another gripe that I do have about the combat of the game as well is the targeting mechanism is really frustrating to use sometimes, especially in the later half of the game where they're throwing just enemy after enemy after enemy after enemy at you, and you're very easily going to get surrounded, so you have to rely on the voices in your head to tell you when to dodge, or just keep dodging and hope for the best. And trying to lock on to, the higher threat targets, the guys that are faster, the guys with special abilities, stuff like that, can really feel infuriating, because you will also automatically lock onto an enemy if you accidentally hit them. So for example, if I'm locked onto one guy and I'm getting ready to run and slash at him, but somebody else, maybe I accidentally hit somebody else or somebody jumps in the way, now I'm targeting that other guy. Now I gotta sit there and toggle with the stick over until I target the other guy, and it's really frustrating and makes already annoyingly unnecessary combat even more frustrating. Now, another really cool mechanic that the game has for the combat is Senua's infection is also represented on her arm, and every time you die, that infection slowly moves up towards her head. Now, the game warns you very early in the beginning, the first few minutes of the game, when you first contract this disease, that if it ever reaches your head, the game is going to delete your save file. Now, I never tested this because I did not want to have to replay the entire game. I probably should have, but I really didn't want to risk that. So even if it's not true, that's a really cool thing to make you really care and pay attention to every action you do. Make sure everything's planned properly, and you panic in combat sometimes. You get knocked to the floor, you don't want to die, because that's one step closer to maybe having your save file deleted. Then lastly is the puzzle solving aspect of the game. Now this one's actually really, really interesting, because the way the puzzles work in this game is you're going to encounter these doors, and the doors have either Celtic or Norse runes on it. I think they're Celtic runes on the door, and you have to find those runes in the environment, and they're not like etched onto anything or anything like that. Maybe you got to find this weird X looking thing, and the way you find it is by positioning, going around, I don't know, a chair sitting up against a wall that's up against a beam, and when you angle yourself and the camera in the right direction and you focus, which you zoom in, and you can see that rune, and when you focus, it'll actually highlight the rune and show that you got it, and then boom, that rune turns blue, and you have to turn all the runes blue, and it opens up the door. And I really like these puzzles because it makes you really look at the environment in a different way when you see the runes that you need to get, and they're kind of transparent on the screen, so you don't have to constantly keep going back. You can focus, and it'll like highlight them a little bit more, so it's not to the point of annoyance. But it means now you turn around and you go, okay, what could make these symbols? And you're looking for that now, and it's pretty cool. However, there's also some problems with the puzzle mechanic, because where you have to angle the camera at the right angle in order to make these runes, there were several occasions where I'm looking at the rune and I have the little somewhat clear highlight over it, and it's perfect. It matches up exactly, but it wasn't exactly as the game wanted me to, and I wound up having to be a couple steps to the left or to the right, and it was just kind of annoying. I remember very verbally going, "You've got to be kidding me." And because I already had it perfect, and how the game wanted me to actually wasn't as lined up as mine was. So just go in knowing that you're gonna have to be very exact with how the camera is angled when trying to find those runes. The last thing I do want to note is I did have several crashes with the game that actually a couple times required me to restart my entire computer in order to play. Now, with that said, that might have been my computer specifically, because it is a little bit of a potato. But just kind of know I did have a lot of technical problems, kind of peppered throughout the game. But the game does a pretty decent job at autosaving at regular intervals, so I usually didn't have to replay too much. And sometimes I actually had it crash one time when I was getting ready to die in combat, which was pretty cool because it didn't count it as a death from what I could tell on Senua's arm. Another thing I really hated about the game is the sensitivity was set really low, and I couldn't find a way in the options to actually change it. So with the mouse sensitivity felt even lower, because of course I can move my hand faster than the screen was able to move, so I would have to move my hand, pick it up, move it up, and just keep doing that. And it didn't matter what I set my actual mouse's sensitivity to, it seemed to always really suck. But when I switched over to the Xbox controller on my computer, it of course stayed the same speed, but it did feel a little better. So kind of take that with a grain of salt. So final thoughts time. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, I really, really like this game. Even though I hated the combat, like I said, it was really fun the first half, but the last half of the game, it actually got to the point at one point that I was just like, I don't even want to play this anymore if it's going to keep throwing this much combat at me. And it just got really annoying and really frustrating, and I began to start hating the game. But I kind of powered through it because I could tell kind of as things were ramping up, I could tell I was close to the end, and I didn't want to give up on Senua that late into the game. I already saw her through this much of hell. I wanted to see her journey through to the end. So even with that, with the really frustrating camera angles on the way you have to solve the puzzles, with my crashes, with the annoying controls or the sensitivity, you're not playing Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice for the gameplay, to be completely honest. You are playing this to hear Senua's story, and it is a really good story. The ending is outstanding. The ending kind of wraps up a couple things that I disliked about the game, which will make more sense when and if you play this game, because I don't want to spoil anything here. The story is fantastic. The voice actress, kudos to her. The animation team for just animating Senua's facial expressions, the motion capture. Throughout this game, you genuinely feel bad for Senua. You want her to get better. You want her to finish her journey. Maybe you almost get like a dad complex. You want to protect her because she's very innocent. She just wants this man that she loves. She wants to save his soul and get his soul back. And that's all she wants. If that means she's destroyed the process, then so be it. And it's such an amazing journey. You get to the end, and it all wraps up in just a spectacular way. And it's the type of story that's going to keep you thinking. It's kind of on par with Nier Automata that I reviewed a little while back, that it kind of delves, because it keeps you thinking, and it delves into kind of psychosis and the philosophy behind everything that Senua did. What did it actually mean? And it just, like, I can go on and on about what I loved about this game. Anyways, before this turns further into a rant, that is my review for Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys next time in the quarantine.